This moment is proudly brought to you by Etosha Gardens. A journey of life. With every drop of water comes life. With every life comes memories. Each memory that is shared creates a legacy to be remembered. Etosha Gardens, your cemetery of choice. Welcome back to the second segment of Rufu, Rwakarongeka, proudly brought to you by Etosha Gardens, your cemetery of a choice. Extensive discussions are being held here with the Master of the High Court of Zimbabwe, Mr. Eldad Mutasa, appreciating some of the key sentiments that are highlighted around the issues of states, their management, and a few more key concerns that we'll be discussing during the rest of our program. Now, before we're talking about a key individual, the executor, and the role that they play in managing all the assets that are tied to the deceased estate. Now, what if the executor has got interests in the estate? I mean, you highlighted that someone has been given title deeds, books of the car. These could be high-end exotic vehicles, 4x4s. And how then do we address an interest that could come on the part of the executor?
Okay. Yeah, like we mentioned that an executor plays a very important role in the winding up of the estate. What the public needs to know, number one, is that an executor, it doesn't mean he or she is the exclusive beneficiary to the estate. It can be a complete outsider who has no interest in the estate. It could be a relative, a parent, a child, or the surviving spouse, right? So, but that is not to say if one is appointed as an executor, it means the person has been appointed to be the beneficiary. I've noticed over the years that there is always that mistaken notion that once one is an executor, he or she has been made a beneficiary. But it can happen that the executor is also a beneficiary. So that's...
I'm keen to find out on that point. In what instance would you find a scenario where a relative is made the executor?
Yeah, if the family elects to appoint someone with a certain set of skills within the family, there may be an accountant, there may be a lawyer within the family, but this lawyer is not a child to the deceased, neither is he a surviving spouse. But they believe, because of the certain set of skills that he or she possesses, he or she is in a position to administer the estate properly and professionally. You see, so in that case, if the family chooses or elects to appoint such a skilled person, and we are okay with it, then the person can be appointed. Yeah, but we've had some situations where a beneficiary is also appointed as executor. That is to say, a child or even a surviving spouse. The law actually prefers surviving spouse in circumstances where there is competition for the post of an executor. But the issue of interest now usually does arise where a person may be greedy. You know, executors are human.
Yes.
They are human. They can also make wrong judgments and so on. We have a law in place. There is a law. The Administration of Estates Act is like the Bible when it comes to deceased estates administration. But there are also other acts which also feeds to the process of winding up in the administration of the estate. We are talking of the Deceased Estates Succession Act, where the deceased was married in terms of the general law. That is our new chapter 517, former chapter 511, former chapter 37. In such cases, the estate distribution, that is the awarding of assets, is governed by the Deceased Estate Succession Act.
Right.
Then we have what we call Amendment 6 of 97, or Section 68F of the Administration of Estates Act, Chapter 601. That governs distribution of estate assets where the person was married customarily. You see, so there are common processes within the two systems, but then also there are certain processes which are peculiar to certain type of an estate. But the executor generally is expected to follow procedures as they are provided for in the relevant statutes. Sure. So the issue of interests must always be in the context of what does the procedure demands, what does the procedure entail. So the moment someone departs from the procedure or departs from the law, then obviously measures will be taken, either some form of penalty removal of that executor or certain other sanctions, or we give the executor directions to act in a certain way. Because in circumstances where there are what we call camps in our office, or factions, or divisions, it usually occurs where the deceased was polygamous.
Right.
Yeah, there are 3 wives and so on. So we are talking of maybe 3 sets of factions or divisions or camps. And then if the family appoints one, a child from another family as the only executor, you can't rule out the possibility of bias. Right. Towards protecting the interests of the but it's not provided for in our laws, but it happens.
It happens
naturally.
I'm appreciating what you're sharing there. To the best of your appreciation of the situations that you have come across, how best would you advise someone to be able to approach that executor role in consideration for when they are passing? Meaning that should I make that decision now whilst I'm still alive? And what considerations should I make on who to pick to make sure that Rufu Rwakarongeka?
Yeah, that goes deep into estate planning now. We are talking of being in charge of how you want things done after your death. So the simplest way is to have a will. Yeah, it's the cheapest estate planning method, where you just approach a professional, be it a lawyer, to guide you on how to write a will. But a will, you can even do it on your own with programs such as this, where we tell people that all you need is to pick a paper, and the first thing you do is to identify yourself. I, Elder Mutasa, ID number, address. You see, this is what I want done, or this is what I want to happen after my death. Make sure you indicate that after my death. If you don't indicate that after your death, then we take it just as a love letter or something. We don't know what you are writing. You see, so yeah, so after my death, then you go on to say, I own these properties. I want them shared or distributed to so and so, identifying their names and so forth. Then you can even indicate the person you want to be appointed as executor.
Is this where you find instances where, maybe if I could use a reference to some of these films that people watch, where you get told that there's a long lost uncle who is now giving you a car or an asset or whatever it may be, and this is the process that you're referring to that results in beneficiaries being...
Yeah, because I have the liberty to appoint a person of my choice as beneficiary. I'm not even compelled to appoint my children as beneficiaries to award them anything, or even my spouse.
Right.
You see, that's the doctrine of freedom of testation. Anyway, where I can give my pastor my estate ahead of my children. Right. Though we wouldn't recommend that because it falls under irresponsible wills, because who will take off your children? But it still remains valid. Right. You see. So because of that, we have had cases where some children have become destitutes. Right. Not necessarily because of the father or mother did not have assets, but chose to write this will when he was super excited, maybe at the small house. Right. Yeah, we have had wills. I think my colleague can confirm that we've had weird wills where someone awards almost 3/4 of his estate to a girlfriend. Right. You see, at the expense of the wife and children.
You raised a very important point, is that there is no compelling spouse or even your children to that. But I do also want to pick up on situations where, yes, you may find that the children are the beneficiaries, but there are also fees and costs that come with being able to address your office even. How then do you manage those particular dilemmas?
Okay. Yeah, if you are into estate planning, it's not difficult. Because if you are writing your own will, like I've said, we always encourage people to write responsible wills when they are sober. It should not be a document to fix someone. Right. It should not be a document written out of excitement, but you must be cool, composed, sober, planning for your family. So in that case, you can then, because remember, you're talking of your assets. Right. You probably have 3 vehicles, 2 stands, and so on. That's when you indicate in the will that with regards to the costs and expenses, I authorize the executor to dispose stand number so to meet expenses. I authorize the executor to dispose vehicle number, registration number, so and so to meet expenses. Those who are clever enough or fortunate enough, they may even have insurance policies aimed at meeting those expenses,
those liquidity issues that may come up,
which may arise after the death of an individual. No one talks of these other movable and immovable assets, but they simply refer to the insurance policy, which one would have acquired for the purpose of meeting the expenses of the estate. So these are things we should do when we are alive. Even the burial, funeral policies, yes, people take them for granted. Right. But those are very critical. Because I should be able to have a decent burial. If I have assets, how do I have that? I should plan. I should have a clear policy. I should know where I will be buried. Right. It should not be a family's decision. Right. I'm here with my mental conscience clear. Why should I leave the decision to other parties? I should be able to indicate in my will or some other policy document that I want to be buried somewhere in these conditions and so on.
You raise a very pertinent point, because I'm sure even from your experience you found that even that distinction of where one must be buried contributes towards issues within the camps, yes, that you alluded to earlier.
Actually, I have a very recent case, Mr. Gwaze, where I think it's last week, there was a tussle on where the deceased should be buried. Other ones were recommending a certain cemetery. Then the other camp was saying a rural home. But at the end, then they said, we as long as we can afford the rural, because the spouse wanted the deceased to be buried at the rural home. Right. But there were no funds. Right. You see, yes, there were no funds and so on. So the family ended up saying, if you want him buried at the rural home. We have no problem, just to make the funds available. Right. Yeah, to cater for everyone and the other expenses, you see. Yeah, but if we have a chance whilst we are alive to plan our lives, we access resources. But the challenge that I seem to see is that we live like we live forever.
I'm glad that you raised situations where people may arrive who weren't known before. What happens in the event that someone arrives after a long period of time? That years have gone by. We didn't know this person existed. Okay. This person now comes. This person proves that this is a beneficiary by virtue of their blood, because he's been told that if you are of blood, you too will benefit. How then do you find, what are the modalities in such a situation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Because everything hinges on the administration process. At what stage is this estate? Has it been finalized? Has the assets, if they've been distributed, has ownership been changed? You see, so you would have missed out, because there are safeguards provided by the law. The whole thing, this whole thing of advertising in the government gazette and the local press for debtors and creditors, advertising the estate liquidation distribution account, it's done for a reason. It's like advertising to the whole world that we are dealing with an estate Mutasa. Whoever believes is entitled to something, this is how we are going to distribute the estates. Dopa inobudama advertise a liquidation distribution account, because that account will be speaking to the distribution of assets. Who is getting what? So wherever you are, you should be in a position to then want to inspect the account and satisfy yourself that you are included. If you are not included, you can then raise issue with the executor or the master. And then we take it from there.
And then I guess maybe my final question before we wrap up at this segment, we also do have those who apply indigenous knowledge systems, those who have got what I could call maybe a royal lineage in themselves. They too also to a degree have got their own ways of ensuring that things are passed on. How then do you manage situations where you've got people who want to use traditional ways, but at the same time you've got others who are saying, no, there's the master. He's there under law.
It's a serious challenge. Actually, this is the reason why in around 2018, Excellence, the First Lady, Dr. Auxilia Mnangagwa, she spearheaded awareness campaigns on inheritance matters. This was because when she interrogated complaints that were brought to her office by women and widows on property grabbing and so on, she realized that people who did it, it was not necessarily because of the criminal mindset, but it was largely due to ignorance, lack of knowledge. Some would say we are advancing our traditional practices by saying let's distribute household goods and assets and so on, when the law clearly provides that you can only distribute clothing. The rest, my television sets, my sofa, my chi, are supposed to be distributed through the estate administration process involving the executor and the master. But what is happening, Mr. Gwaze? We've witnessed the situation where people have actually designed my Shona names. Kuti zite weight chivanhu chaya chinyatso remerea kana vachida kutora masofa your 5-piece leather lounge suit, they can't say lounge suit, they will say chituru. Zvinobva zvaita chi weight yechivanhu waona manje chituru chambva chadi masofa amba akandwa murori. Then when they want to take your therapeutic bed, which was very expensive, vanoti chi bonde, they say bonde unombva wanzwa kukomborera kwechivanhu so kuti panzi bonde utorwa mubhedha wabaya. You see, same applies to fridge. I had pane imwe kuchinzi vakuti donotso. Nyara kuti vakati fridge tikuba. You see, all those things they've devised mashona names kuti zvikere weight. Vachita unge vari kuita chivanhu. But that's not it. It's actually property grabbing. And it has been criminalized in terms of Section 10 of the Deceased Persons Family Maintenance Act, Chapter 603. They are criminalized property grabbing. But you can't use kunge muri kuita chivanhu muchitora such major assets. You can only distribute clothing. So it's criminal. A person can be jailed for 2 years according to Maskel's punishment. 2 years. Yeah. And then ndakambotaura pane imwe forum yemapastors ndikati ndimunonzi Simon Amato tauda kugowa. We are actually blessing any illegality.
You are complicit.
Yes. So panozonzi police yakuuya. Because police have been very helpful, I would say. We take a report, they will investigate, they will come. Voto Tindian. Motanga kutero. Vakakomborerwa na mfundisi. Vakati tasvika panguva yekugowa. So vanhu izvo zvitatobatsira mapastors through this program. Vanga vachanti pamwe mangwana kune nyara dzo Mr. Gwaze yanga achitatoda kunzi mutisire munamato wekugowa mafiriji nechichi. It's illegal. It's illegal. It has to go through a process. And that minimum is usually 6 months. The process is winding up of an estate. Unless if it's a very small estate, it can be done in 2 months or less. Yeah, but 6 months, though it provided from Act, the estate account should be filed in order to distribution. It should be done within 6 months. But when we do manji, that's why I'm not. We discourage practice we uchingoerengwa kunzi ndingarupwa mota and so on. Vanhu vomba vatora. That's not the proper practice. They remain potential beneficiaries to those things until due process has been done. Because estate is liabilities. In my expenses in HA.
Maybe you can just share when you say due process. What do you mean exactly? What's that final due process?
The process, it's simple. Registration of estate is number 1, which must be done within 14 days of death, not of burial. Of death. The relevant Section 5, Administration of Estates Act, is clear on that. Within 14 days of death, whether there's a death certificate or not, it's not an issue because the death certificate has not been made a statutory requirement. People can even use burial order or even just complete my forms as required by law. Death notice, ne inventory. Within 14 days of death. So once the estate is registered, then we go into the appointment of an executor. Once the executor is appointed, the executor looks at advertising the estate for debtors and creditors, compiling an executor's inventory within 42 days of appointment. Then the final stage is compiling an estate account. You see, which deals with assets, liabilities, and distribution. And then you distribute the residue, the remainder, after factoring in estate expenses and liabilities. That is why we say, don't rush to distribute assets upon reading of a will. Because what if there are more assets, there are more liabilities than assets? There will be nothing to distribute. You see, there will be nothing to distribute. Yet already people have received these assets, and some might have even sold them to those assets to third parties. It becomes cumbersome for the executor to then want to recover those assets.
And the executor, if I understand you well, plays the role of protecting the liability component here, because
actually this whole process is meant to protect creditors. That's the primary. My beneficiaries, we always call them potential. Because you get last, there may be nothing to really distribute. Ndikakoromora chikwere ku Agribank today or some other bank, 100,000, and my estate is worth 80,000. What happens? You see, what happens? So that's when you see my properties are chitengeswa, and the people are quick to want to say, Master, he's a cruel man. insensitive, greedy, like we play games. I come from the society as well. I don't want these assets sold, but it's the circumstances that result in selling.
And on that particular note, there will definitely acknowledge why it's important to make sure Rwakarongeka.
Yes.
Interesting sentiments are being shared there, of course, and bring us to the end of our discussion in this particular episode. But please make sure that you do join us for more discussions right here on Rufu Rwakarongeka, proudly brought to you by Tosha Gardens, your cemetery of choice.
This moment was proudly brought to you by Tosha Gardens. Journey of life. With every drop of water comes life. With every life comes memories. Each memory that is shared creates a legacy to be remembered. Tosha Gardens, your cemetery of choice.